Grand Prix heroes are high-tech and high-profile. It's the nature of the sport. But a Grand Prix hero of the past is still one of the most recognized and charismatic figures in any Formula One paddock. And the story he has to tell is one of the most amazing in any sport. Legends of Formula One has come here to Hungary, and we're going to spend time with Niki Lauda. The racing career of Austria's Niki Lauda has become the stuff of sporting legend and Hollywood box office. World champion with Ferrari in 1975, he was given the last rites following his Nürburgring crash in 1976. But then the man with the famously scarred profile returned to become world champion again in 1977 and 1984. He's also run his own airlines and has returned to the heart of Grand Prix racing as non-executive chairman of Mercedes, the dominant team on the 2014 grid. Niki, thanks for sparing the time on what is always a very busy Grand Prix weekend. And when you sit in an environment like this, I mean, the contrast with where you were when you came into the sport, late 60s, early 70s, it must seem like a different world.
For sure, it's a different world because there's been a long time between then and now. So everything developed, like I would say, in any professional sport. We never had a terrace like this. We were sitting basically in the pits on a toolbox and had a banana. So this was the difference. But the racing itself is the same. The surrounding here is expensive and different.
Yeah. When you started off, when you were driving in Formula V and Minis and Formula 3, what was the belief in yourself that you could actually go to the highest level of the sport? What did you feel was your natural talent?
So first, you want to race because I like to drive cars quick. This was the beginning. And then you start yourself driving a Mini, a Formula V, then Formula 3, so you work your way up. But there was never the idea to be a Formula 1 driver because I was pragmatic enough to understand that you have to perform first and don't dream. So all I try to do is do the best out of every formula I was in. In the old days, you had to do everything yourself. You had to find a way to find a car yourself. It was a completely different time, which I think was much better and easier than it might be today, in a way that you are in charge of everything and not management.
Lauda can look back on a career in which he was always in charge, but by a combination of courage and cunning. In 1971, after battling in junior formulas, he had the chance to buy his way into Max Mosley's underperforming March Formula One team. However, Lauda's family, although wealthy, was strongly opposed to any thought of him going racing.
I had to bring around 150,000 euros for a season. And I had in Vienna a sponsor, which was with me for the last 3 years in Formula 3, an Austrian bank. And they told me, yes, we want the bank advertising on the Formula 1 car, and here's the money. I went over to Max and signed the contract, and when I came back, the bank manager called me immediately and said, listen, I have a problem. Your grandfather is sitting in the supervisory board of the bank. And we had to get this through the supervisory board, and he said, is this Niki, my family member? I said, yes. There's no way. He should be working in the industry and not being a racing driver. So they canceled the contract, which they've agreed with me, and then I had no money. And I was really worried, because when you try to get into Formula 1 and you promise money and you sign a contract, this is not the right way to start. And I went to another bank and said, give me a loan. And they said, are you crazy? What happens if you have an accident and you kill yourself? So I said, okay, then let's make an insurance. Huh? So I had to give them a life insurance to get the money as a loan. And the interest rate was reduced because the publicity they had on the car and on my helmet was reduced interest rates for the loan. And it took me 3 or 4 years to pay it back.
The car was awful, wasn't it?
The car was awful. I was driving with Ronnie Peterson. None of us could show anything because the car was just wrong. And then in the end of the season, March closed the place down. Yeah, there was a big money problem there. And then Max told me again, the end of the season, unfortunately, you can't drive next year. because we need to find a way to survive. So I've spent the money, I had no results whatsoever, and I was stuck. This was a difficult point because I had the loan, no result, and nowhere to go.
Just as Lauda's career prospects hit rock bottom, enter Lewis Stanley, the boss of BRM, with another Formula One opportunity, but one that also carried a big price tag.
Lewis Stanley came to Vienna, and I asked my new sponsor, bank manager, to come with me to this meeting so it looks a little bit better. And we sat in a Viennese airport, and we started to negotiate, and I said, this is my bank who is sponsoring me, and they're ready to continue, which was not the case. And the good thing was that the bank manager didn't speak very well English. So whenever I translated something, I made sure that they didn't really understand when the first part of the money was due. You know, the question for me was to get in the car, show that I hopefully can show some results, and then pay in May the first amount of the BRM sponsorship. And I have to say, I did a good job driving the BRM. Then we came to Monte Carlo, and I was running third in the BRM. And then still have not paid my money because it was after Monte Carlo, the first payment. And then I retired again because unfortunately the car wasn't very reliable. And then Mr. Stanley took me up to the Hotel de Paris that evening on Sunday night and said to me, I know that you might have some problems with your sponsorship. Why don't I sign you up now as a proper driver without sponsorship? And this contract goes, and I can't remember exactly, for 2 years. So I was so happy that finally I did my job well and that I can continue in Formula One. And I signed on Sunday night this deal. And I had a little office in Salzburg where I used the secretary of my cousin. And there was the running gag that whenever I left for a race, I said, when Ferrari calls, please tell me, as a joke. And I came home from Monte Carlo on Monday, and the girl said, the Ferrari called. So I said, no, here's the number, call them. I called them, it was Montezemolo, who was part of the team management there. I should come down, Mr. Ferrari wants to see me. So I jumped in a car, drove all the way down, and met Mr. Ferrari. Long story short, Ferrari said, I want you to drive for us. So it's fine, but I signed a contract with BRM yesterday, and I don't think I can. And then Ferrari said, listen, let me sort this out. So I said, how are you going to sort this out? No, I will find a settlement with BRM. Don't worry. So for me, I said, fine. I signed the contract with Ferrari.
So the Niki Lauda career so far, junior formulas full of crashes and little glory, a dreadful season with March, one eye-catching drive at Monaco with BRM, and somehow that got him to Ferrari for 1974. At least his monumental personal debts would be cleared if he could carefully establish himself with the most famous team in the sport. But you walked into Ferrari and more or less said to Enzo Ferrari, your car is rubbish. And, you know, what did you feel gave you the qualification to say, right, this is how to do things? To talk to Ferrari like that?
Yeah, this was difficult, but I have to say the BRM was a very quick car. The handling of the car was unbelievable. Yeah. The engine was not powerful enough and it was not reliable, but I knew how a Formula One car can perform. And when they asked me, after the season was over, they asked me to come for the first test in Fiorano. And I tested the Ferrari the first time, and I had understeer like you do not believe. The car didn't point into the corners. There was no traction. The car simply did not work. So, and I stopped, and then the old man was there, and all the engineers, and Foghieri came back, the master.
That was important, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was important. And I got out of the car, and I didn't speak Italian at the time. And Piero, his son, had to translate what I said. So I said, the car is terrible. It is a bad car and it doesn't work. And then Piero said, I can't tell this to my father. I said, you have to, because it's terrible. And then he told him, and then he didn't like it because the Ferrari was something special to him, which was to everybody anyway. And then he said right away, what do we have to do to make the car quicker? I don't know, I'm not an engineer, but you have to get rid of the understeer. And then Foghieri, who was 3 years out of Formula One, and the car was so bad, they brought him back. So he had a real ego to make this car go better.
Yes.
And then I sat down with Foghieri and explained to him what I think is wrong. And then he did the first modification. And Ferrari said at the time, if you get rid of the understeer, how much quicker can you go? I said, 3/10, easy. Yeah, so I said, okay. If you don't do 3/10 quicker, then you're gonna have a problem with me. He told me right forward. So everybody around him was frightened. And I was not, because I knew how big the understeer was. And then Foghieri changed the car, he changed the roll center of the front suspension, did put some camber in or whatever he did. And I think a week later, we tested again, that I was 5/10 quicker. So, and this was really it in the relationship I had to Ferrari, a very close one, because he believed what I could technically tell the engineers, and from then on we went forward.
In fact, Ferrari and Lauda were embarking on a glorious period, with the brilliant Foghieri engineering the car and the dashing Luca de Montezemolo running the team. The first of Niki Lauda's 25 Grand Prix victories would not be far away. As the 1974 season began, Ferrari were looking for their first victory in 19 races. New signing Niki Lauda gave them hope with a second place on his debut in Argentina. And then the winning breakthrough came 3 races later in Spain.
The first race win is for every driver the most important one, because you've never done it. And I didn't realize either, because I think did a good race in Jarama and won the first race, and everybody was happy, very important. But then it was interesting. Fittipaldi called me that evening in the hotel, which I had very little to do with Fittipaldi, because he was the master and I was the young guy. And he said, you know, I tell you what, the first one is the most difficult one, the next ones come easy. I said, what does he mean? I didn't even understand, and he was right. The first one is the most difficult one, because you fight all your way through with all the difficulties to get finally into Formula One. And then when you look back what you had to do for this first win, he was right.
And you had the core of that team working so well, Foghieri and so on, and the product in 75 was the 312. How good a race car was that?
The best, there's no question. This is the same like the Mercedes today. It has a big advantage, because the car was quick. Was quicker than all the others. The 12-cylinder engine, which the Ferrari had with a low center of gravity, the handling of the car, the balance, it was an unbelievable competitive car. And to win the championship in 75 was, I would say, looking back, pretty easy.
The key to 1975, Ferrari knew they had a driver with total self-belief, a commitment to the team, and an instinct for making the car perform to its potential.
It only depended on me. Today they can look all at this data they have, the drivers, they can compare each other, they see where they're braking. All these things is easier today. Yeah, but in these days it was really only me. And whenever they put something new on the car, like a front wing, I tested, I changed it forward and backwards so long that I was sure it is quicker. And we always run the cars in Fiorano before we went to the circuit, to the race. And normally the mechanics do this, just to see simply if they are functioning, if there's no water leak and the brakes work and whatever, to make sure we don't lose time on the track. But I always did this myself, for example. I never let anybody else to do, because when I drove it myself, I knew how the car works. And therefore every Tuesday or Wednesday before the race, I was in Fiorano, did the shakedown, the way it was called, and Ferrari was there. Yeah, and he liked it that I do it myself.
Yeah.
And then he looked at me and said, "Quanti punti? How many points are you going to make?" I said, 9, commentatore. And he was smiling, and off I went.
Yeah.
And very often I brought 9 points home.
The 1975 title challenge would have to be without the inspirational team boss de Montezemolo, who'd moved on to other responsibilities, part of his long-term relationship with Ferrari.
Luca was the master of running the whole show, because he was really clever and did the right thing. And then unfortunately he left. And then Daniele came, but it was not so much of a problem, because the team was running anyway in a perfect way.
1975, the perfect car, and after a slow start, the perfect World Championship. Lauda would take 5 victories on his way to his first title. Ferrari would become champion constructors for the first time in 11 years. And Lauda was the strong-willed, focused character who pulled it all together.
You always had to be the strong man within the team. That was always a principle. You were a number one and you had to behave like a number one.
I wouldn't say that in that strong way, but the Italians, it's very important for the whole team that they have respect for the lap times and wins you can do as a driver. You know, pure power of driving the car quick. And in the Ferrari team it's very important because they always need guidance, because the Italians can go off in any direction.
Absolutely, yeah.
If they're not. So from this point of view, I always made my point, but I had to really do it carefully, that whenever I said something, that it really happens. Because if you tell them we should go left and it's wrong, and then go right, this is the wrong way. So always try to be very focused and what has to happen, and I would say 90% of all the decisions were right.
1976, perhaps the most famous season in Grand Prix history, the year of Hunt versus Lauda, of the Nürburgring, and the sport's greatest comeback. It began with Lauda dominant, with wins in Brazil and South Africa. But then he suffered a big accident, a tractor accident.
I had a new house in Salzburg, and I was doing with a tractor, moving earth with a forklift, whatever you call it, from one place to the other. Malene was up there, said, "Do you want something to drink?" I said, "Yes." Wait, I come up, I turned the tractor to the left, a piece of earth rolled in front of the tire. I had this thing up, and they had no roof on the, no protection for me, and the whole thing rolled over. And I tried to jump off, and was stuck between the gear levers, because otherwise I would have been dead, because the tractor was right on me, and I broke 3 ribs. Thank God, nothing, no more. And then to lift the tractor, pull me out of the tractor, it was really a bad accident.
Lauda urgently went to Willy Dongle, the Austrian fitness expert, who would be needed more intensively a few months later. Lauda couldn't afford to miss a race.
He saw me there, lying there in Salzburg with my ribs, said, "Can you help me?" And then he started to do everything possible. Then we went to Jarama, not to lose a race because of my stupidity. And then I raced, and in the end of the straight, Hunt outbraked me, and I didn't expect him to come in that moment. So I turned in, and there was James. I had to pull to the left not to hit him, and I was going against my ribs things, and I had a pain like you do not believe. Finished the race second, got out of the car by help of Dungle, and my ribs came in, turned in, then Dungle put them back out again. But it was a pain like you do not believe. And then I flew home, right to the hospital, and then I asked the Geneva air traffic controller, just by accident, I said to the pilots, asked them who won the Spanish Grand Prix, and they said Lauda. Hunt was disqualified. So I said, yeah, at least it was worthwhile driving with 3 broken ribs.
And of course you got to know James early on through Formula 3 and the junior formulas in early years. When did you first sense that he was a genuine contender to the title in 76? At what point in the season were you starting to feel a bit threatened?
No, he was always a threat, because the guy was in Formula 3 winning races, and he was quick. He could not deliver because he always was in a car which was not as competitive as my Ferrari, for example. So James was always a threat if the car is right. And in the 76 season, in the beginning, there was no chance for him because the McLaren did not work. And then they had this problem with the 2 wide car in Jarama. Then they had to reduce the width of the car, and the car was even worse. So they had a bad time. But when then the Nürburgring accident happened, and the second half of the season, they suddenly got everything together with the McLaren car. And then suddenly, from one second to the other, Hunt could prove his performance, and he was outstanding, and had a good car.
Mid-season, James Hunt's disqualification for the width infringement in Spain would be overturned. By the time they got to the British Grand Prix at Brands Hatch, he was only 26 points behind Lauda. The chaos of the first lap accident, caused when Ragazzoni ran into Lauda, turned to anger when it seemed that Hunt wouldn't be allowed to join the restarted race. I confess to being among the 80,000 fans chanting, "We want Hunt." And an hour later, he was reinstated and would win the British Grand Prix. Understandably, Lauda sensed conspiracy.
I mean, there were two things. One was this wrong width of the car, which today, or in these days, is clear. He was too wide. But he found a way, because there was this huge fight between Ferrari, Italy, and against the British. So the British mafia, let's call it, were fighting like crazy to fight Ferrari. Yeah? So for whatever argument, I can't remember, they got back that the Yarama was a victory, which nobody understood. And then this Brands Hatch came, and all you two wanted to see James race. So it was completely illegal, because he crashed his car, drove back into the pits with 3 wheels, and they used the time to rebuild the car, which was completely forbidden at the time by the rules. But nevertheless, it was the British power who made him race again. For me, it was okay. It was a normal fight, like in all other Formula 1 seasons, and he was able to race again.
It was starting to feel like a classic season, but 2 weeks later, the circus atmosphere of Brands Hatch would be replaced by the somber mood of the Nürburgring. Niki Lauda would be fighting for his life. The 1976 season had arrived at the Nürburgring. Lauda had strongly criticised the dangers of the circuit. The fiery accident and the near-fatal injuries he suffered there could be traced to the failure of one small component.
There was a new magnesium part on the top of the engine, which was therefore weight saving, and this broke. So my right rear wheel moved, or lost the engine magnesium part, and the car turned right and crashed. Mazzario saved my life, because they were all jumping around. You could see it in television. I didn't know, because I had no idea what's happening. And then Arturo came in, and I asked him afterwards, what was the difficult part? He said the fire I didn't mind, because I was dressed anyway, fireproof, but I couldn't open the seatbelt, because he said I was pushing so hard for whatever reason that I couldn't open the seatbelt. He couldn't get the buckle to open. Then thank God he did, and then he pulled me out. And I said, listen, how can you pull me out in the fire, getting me through the dashboard? I'm for sure 65 kilos heavy. And he said, you were light as a feather. It was unbelievable. It was a nice say. And he had all the strength to get me out. Yeah. Otherwise, I would not be here.
Lauda's very serious internal injuries from breathing toxic gases were yet to become apparent as a conscious Lauda was taken from the circuit. Willy Dongel was already on standby to cope with Lauda's broken ribs, collarbone and cheekbone. But before the battle for fitness would come the battle for life itself.
Then the first time I woke up, I asked the doctor, where are we going? He said, we go to the hospital. I said, how long do we fly? He said, 45 minutes. And then I was gone again, and then I came there. And then I was listening to the doctor saying, if we do this, he's gonna die. If you use oxygen, that's no good. And I could listen all this. I said, I'm not in good shape now. And then they gave me then the nurse asked me if I want the last rites. So I thought, why not? I mean, it must help. This was my simple thought.
Encouraging request.
I nodded. And nothing happened. And then I felt on my shoulder that somebody touched me, but you get touched very often when the nurse is doing something. And then I suddenly realized that he was there when the nurse was asking me and didn't speak to me, which I expected him to do. Gave me the last rites and left. And then I really got upset. I mean, then I thought, Jesus Christ, this is completely unfair, because I expected him to tell me positive things. And then I really said to myself, no, I'm not gonna die, because this is annoying. And it was good, actually, because the only thing you could get out of this mess was with your brain, because the body you couldn't do anything. The body was more or less dead, but the brain was still working, and the brain convinced myself, stay awake, don't sleep, because you're gonna die, listen to whatever's happening and keep going. This was my idea, and it worked out very well, thank God. And after 2 or 3 days, then I was over. The lung damage was the biggest problem.
It was, yeah.
And then
so that gave you the determination. Another sort of motivation was was the thought that, I mean, looking back on it, Ferrari had sort of given up on you as well, hadn't they? Was that a motivating factor that, you know, you'll really show them?
So when I came out of hospital, recovered, 43 days I think, I went home because I was home anyway a couple of days. I thought, try to race again or not. I always knew the danger I was putting myself into, because every year at least one got killed or sometimes two. So then I said to myself, I'm still alive, thank God, so sure I go back, because this is part of my job anyway, or my life. And then I said to myself, now I want to see how you can handle fear, problems, get rid of this accident up here. And this was then my challenge to say, I will try. I want to go and try how this works. New experience. Then I went to Fiorano, asked Ferrari if I can test the car to see, because the blood was coming off my balaclava here. This hurt very much because this was not treated well. So whenever I drove, was pain. I had Dunkel with me, and we tried to see if I can drive with this injury as a car. Then I decided in Fiorano, this was I think Monday or Tuesday before Monza race. I said, yes, I will try. And then Ferrari told me, come to my office, sat down with him and said, are you sure? I said, yeah, I'm sure. Why? Because if you don't drive in Monza and we lose the championship, it looks better. Then I was thinking, no. I want to go to Monza because I want to drive. I have a contract. The problem he had is that he had Reutemann signed up, Regazzoni anyway, and I had in my contract a clause that only 2 cars are allowed to race. Yeah, because I never wanted 3, because it was a clever move at the time. And then I came to Monza on Thursday, and suddenly they decided I need a medical check. But I had a medical check done in Austria. I had all the paperwork with me that I'm fit to drive. And they really annoyed me with all this, and I was under a lot of pressure. The media was waiting, 1,000 journalists it was a pain in the ass. This Thursday was the worst. I was weak, I wanted to come back, and I was treated badly. And then on the next day, practice started, and I still had all this pressure on me, and I got out of the pits, couldn't drive. Second gear, fear came, I had to stop.
Fear came?
Yeah, fear. Pure fear. Couldn't drive. And then I stopped. Gary said, what the hell is going on? I said, well, give me time. And I couldn't fix it. Then I went out again, but couldn't fix it. And then I got out of the car, went back to the hotel and thought, why is this now? Fiorano was good, and now you can't drive. What is the reason? And it took me a while to work it out. Then I said to myself, my fault. I pushed myself too hard to perform right away again. Go there on Saturday and drive around as this is a test. And this was my new program. So I came on Saturday. I said to my team, I don't want to know any times of anybody else. I don't even want to see my times, which is normal racing, and let me drive. So put all the pressure off and got out and drove like a Sunday drive. Quicker and quicker, like the car, got the understeer, and no pressure from the race. It was Saturday. Friday I missed. And then I got out of the car, felt good, looked at the time, quickest Ferrari. Ooh, I said, interesting, Mr. Reutemann, Regazzoni, you were not in the hospital. This gave me confidence again, you know, that my fear problem was reduced. And then we came to the start of the race. Nobody told me that they introduced the light start, because they forgot. I came to the grid, looked, where's the guy with the flag? Had no gear in the car. And then suddenly everybody took off. And then I said, oh, there's a green light up there. Then I was right through the field all the way back 13 or 14th, which is again terrible, because when you get confidence and you want to race, you don't want to go through the whole field. This is dangerous. Then it started to drizzle, which was the worst again. You know, I had all the conditions at that race which you don't want after an accident like this. But nevertheless, I got going properly and finished 4th or 5th, I can't remember, and made it. That was it.
After the bravery of Monza, Hunt's British Grand Prix win was overturned on appeal. But Hunt won in Canada and Watkins Glen, and it will be Lauda on 68 points, leading Hunt by 3 going into the final race. A worldwide audience will be tuned into the Japanese Grand Prix.
On the track, I hated the guy because he was taking points away and I couldn't beat him. But as a person, he was a gentleman. Nothing else to say.
Japan, it's been analysed what happened in the first couple of laps in those dreadful conditions. You look back on it with no discomfort. The decision in your mind was taken purely for reasons of safety.
Correct. We were sitting there for hours because the circuit was flooded. Nobody thought that this race will happen or can happen. And then suddenly at 4 in the afternoon, the race director came and said, we're going to start the race. But nothing has changed. Television. It's the first time worldwide television. Bernie for sure told him to make sure the race has to start because it was a big event on television. And the pressure came on. And then they said, we start at 4. And then I said, you're nuts. The circuit is still flooded. And like always, some drivers went, some drivers didn't. I think with me, 2 or 3 others stopped. Fittipaldi stopped, Pace stopped.
Yeah.
So it was not only me, but it was a ridiculous situation. And because of my responsibility for safety, it was unacceptable to start the race under these conditions. And therefore I pulled out. In the end, to lose against James, who was at the best of his driving moments, with a McLaren which supported him 110%. Even in the last couple of races, the McLaren was quicker than the Ferrari. And with the combination of James, I honestly don't feel bad that I lost the championship by half a point, because James was absolutely the better man in that part of the season, with or without my accident. But nevertheless, I was happy that he won it.
James Hunt's 3rd place had given him the title by a single point. So at the end of a controversial Japanese Grand Prix and a traumatic season, it was said that Hunt was the future and Lauda's competitive edge had gone. They were even thinking that at Ferrari. Lauda, though, had other ideas. Within just a few days of Lauda's Nürburgring accident, it was said that Ferrari were making plans for life without the Austrian. Those plans were strengthened after Lauda's withdrawal from the Japanese Grand Prix. Now into 1977, Lauda was still theoretically number 1, but with the arrival of Carlos Reutemann, he was going to have to fight for that status.
I asked the engineers, where's the next test? Next test is in Paul Ricard. And who is doing the test? Reutemann. So I went straight to the Ferrari office and said, what's going on? He said, yeah, you do the brake pads here in Fiorano, and Reutemann now, he's the number 1 driver. He does all the development, and he's gonna do the test in Paul Ricard, and you're not gonna do the test in Paul Ricard. So I said, he has no more confidence in me. He thinks I'm finished because losing a championship, an accident, whatever, and this is his decision. So I said, fine, went out of the office, came back, and I said, I have an offer from another team to drive. And they said, where? McLaren. Was not true. So my contract says I can drive as a number 1 driver here, and now you tell me the opposite. So here's my contract, I go to McLaren, because you break my contract. And then he sent me out, and huge discussions, and then I knew that they were caught in my legal issues. And then he called me in and he said, okay, you're right, do the brake pads, and then go to Paul Ricard and you can do the last day only. Legally correct. Last day only, good. Did the stupid brake test, went to Paul Ricard on the first day of testing and was sitting there watching Reutemann driving my car. Got in the car, did 3 laps, checked the car out, changed the front wing, said, give me a new set of tires. The engine was worn out, the gearbox was worn out, give me a new set of tires, and that's it. Drove out, it was a cool morning, 6/10 quicker than Reutemann all 3 days long. So they came, what can we do? Put seat belt out of the car. I said, what do you mean? No, my test is finished. Because if you go with him, you go in the wrong direction. But I'm not going to do more unless we clear the situation up. So drove home, Ferrari called me next day, I've come immediately down. Sorry, you are in charge of testing the car. Not Reutemann, me, yes, you. Next test is here and you are the number one guy again. Fine.
The animosity to Reutemann remained through 1977, and so did Lauda's advantage. He would win the title with 3 victories backed up by great consistency, and then quit Ferrari, with 2 races of the season still to go.
For me at the time, an easy decision to leave, but to look backwards, it was the wrong decision to leave, because I would have stayed with Ferrari. I could have won more championships.
Next stop was Brabham, where Lauda linked up with Bernie Ecclestone for a 1978 season dominated by the ground effects Lotus. The only time Lauda and Brabham set the pace was when designer Gordon Murray came up with the famous fan car.
No, the first impression was in Brands Hatch, where Gordon Murray introduced his car. Borgit, my mechanic, came with me to work for Alfa Romeo, and when they were warming up the car in the pits, it was going up and down. So I took Borgit, what the hell is this? Oh, because the fan sucks the air out and goes up and down. Interesting. So I drove out, first lap, understeer like you do not believe, car terrible, and as this car was going up and down, I thought, use 1 gear lower, rev it up and see what happens. 1 gear lower, the thing sucked into the ground and I went like you do not believe. Brands Hatch. So I understood the system. Watts and me were about, I don't know, 10th on the grid or nowhere. And then the race started, and it was even better than Pironi lost his oil cooler and spread oil around the circuit. And I was driving like on rails on the oil, passed everybody and won. It was quite a nice experience.
Did it have a future, or was it just one of those great...
No, it would have been gone too far. You would have killed every driver if this would have been developed.
Yeah.
Circuits were not ready for this kind of speed.
79, you walked away from Formula One. Was that a sort of reflex decision? Was it something that you'd been thinking about, or it
I was
just seemed
already
right
thinking of starting a normal business. Lauda Air was in the back of my mind. I knew that I cannot race forever, so I thought it is the right time to retire.
And you walked away with no regrets and no thoughts that you'd ever be back? Or?
No regrets, nothing. Started the other business for 2 years. And then suddenly Ron called me all the time. What are you doing? How's life? You know, always in the right moments. And then he called me once again. And then I said, yeah, maybe let's do a test.
So Lauda had been tempted back onto the grid. There would be race wins in 1982, but 1983 in particular was a development year for Lauda and McLaren, in the knowledge that the Tag Porsche would make them ultra-competitive in 1984. But then a contract dispute for John Watson opened the door for Lauda to get a challenging new teammate, Alain Prost.
It was difficult. John Watson, he will, I hope you're gonna see this, had an argument with Ron about his salary. And I spoke to Watty and said, listen, you never know what could happen.
Sadly, we'll see no more of John Watson, who's been dropped by McLaren.
And then I thought in the beginning, fine, if Prost comes, little Frenchman, well, I blow him off. This is a normal attitude. And then we came to the first race in Brazil. He out-qualified me, which annoyed me, and he won the first race. In my car, my little teammate wins the first race. This is bad news. But Prost was always out-qualifying me. In the beginning 5 tenths, then 2 tenths, but he was always quicker. And then I changed my strategy and said, fine, I will not get him on qualifying. Let's work on the race setup. And then I changed I didn't care about qualifying, worked the race setup, and then we raced all the way to the end, and I beat him by half a point.
Lauda is on his way to his third World Championship in his 157th Grand Prix, a quite incredible achievement.
I was strictly working with my team, hard, didn't give him any information, the little frog, and let's egocentric divide the team, and let's work. And in the end, we did a good job. It was very close, but half a point has never happened before, and it worked out.
There is the world champion of 1984.
It's now 3 times. Is the third time better than the other 2?
Yes, because it was the most difficult one, because Prost was the best guy, I had around me, and he was quick and good all the year through, so it was the most difficult championship I ever won.
But to give you a little bit of background, Mansour O'Shea, which I respect very well, and Ron, they liked Prost because he was the young guy, future guy, logic that they like him. And they always spoke French with him, and for me it was not nice, let's say. And when we came to Portugal, somebody told me Marlboro has already printed, how you call it?
Posters and
posters.
suddenly, yeah.
Prost world champion, blah, blah, blah. Serious? Yes, they did that. Yeah, even more motivation for me. Anyway, I finished the race second after a hard fight. The first thing I went to the Marlboro man and said, now throw all your posters away.
It was inevitable, however, that Prost would win the title with comparative ease in 1985. For Lauda, the fight and the energy was gone. He announced his retirement at the Austrian Grand Prix and followed it with a final victory in Holland. And then a great racing career was over.
Yeah, I was very happy. Prost was world champion, which I liked because he was the best guy at the time. And I said in Austria goodbye. I retired in Austria officially, that I will stop in the end of the season. So when you take a decision like this, you want to come home safe. This is the main thing.
His activities in racing since then, especially with Mercedes, means it's not quite the end of the story. And in 2013, the film Rush, directed by Ron Howard and starring Daniel Bruhl as Lauda and Chris Hemsworth as James Hunt, brought the drama of the 1976 season and the special rivalry between Lauda and Hunt to a whole new audience. And it proved a bit of an education to Niki Lauda himself.
First of all, Peter Morgan approached me, writing the script, and then Ron Howard came, and I thought, if Ron Howard and Peter Morgan makes a movie, then they're known as high quality. But then when they showed me the movie the first time in Vienna, without music and the raw movie, I looked at it and said, that was a terrible character. I thought, really a bad guy. And I was really not happy in the first impression because Hunt was the playboy being in bed with every woman, and I was the boring idiot who concentrated on the car. And I thought, this is not very nice, I thought, first impression. But then I said to Peter and Ron, I said, guys, anyway, that's the way it is. They said, no, you didn't get the full message, wait. Then when we went to London for the premiere, where I saw the first time the full movie, with music and everything in it, and I was sitting up there, next to Bernie, by the way, and the movie started, and then I was watching reaction of the audience, and they started to laugh. So I felt that the movie came across very well. And then when I saw the movie as a whole, I thought, it's not bad. And then Bernie was sitting next to me and said, can we see this again? I said, what do you mean? I mean, I'm so impressed. I want to stay here and see it again. Then everybody got up and was applause. And then I thought, the movie is really good.
And the great thing about that film, it genuinely reflected an era where there were strong personalities in the sport. There was also a sense of mystery in the sport. Nobody really understood what was going on in a driver's cockpit in those days, even the guys in the pit lane. We've lost that now. How do we get back to some of the important ingredients that were around then?
The problem I have today is that we have too many rules now for driving a race. All this takes away the glamour of the drivers because they're over-regulated and they don't do anything anymore. So what the sport has to do is get rid of all these rules again, let them race. That we have the drivers in our picture as being the winners and not the car and regulations. So there's a lot of things which should be done. Let them race. If there's something bad happening, then you have to involve the clerk of the course and the stewards, I agree. But we have to get rid of this controlling too much of the sport. Absolutely. And I think this is the most important what you have to do now.
And as regards your own relationship with Nico and Lewis, you drove in a different era, in a different kind of sport. What is it in your experience that you're able to relate to them, and are they able to relate back to you?
Very little, because the driving, as we explained before, is completely different today. It's driven by the engineers and the drivers. They tell them what to do when they go to the starting sequence of getting the car going. It's a completely different thing. We have to do everything on their own. But my relation with Luis and Nico is completely normal. If there are things happening, they talk to me, I talk to them, but only the racing language. Because the other language is Paddy Lowe and Toto Wolff explaining to them what Mercedes and blah, blah, blah has to do. But there's sometimes things which I ask them or they ask me, and I can tell them a straight racing view, which is sometimes different of management.
The respect is mutual, I'm sure. The hard work is about to start here, Niki. Thanks very much for your time.
Thank you.
And reflections on a remarkable career.
Thank you very much.
Niki Lauda, thank you very much.
Thank you.